Good evening and welcome to South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio's live statewide coverage of the U.S. Senate Special Republican Party primary. I'm Gavin Jackson. The polls officially closed 1 hour ago and numbers are starting to come in, and here are the latest. Right now we're looking at Senator Darlene Graham at 54% and 5th District Congressman Ralph Norman at 46%. About 26% of the votes have been counted so far. It's still very early, so those are just some initial numbers that we're watching right there with Darlene leading Congressman Norman at about 8 points. So we'll be following that all night, and we have reporters at watch parties around the state, and we'll have analysis for you as well. More on that in a moment. But like every election night, we only declare winners in races when the Associated Press calls them, so stand by for those calls. Now, again, this is a special primary election which determines which Republican candidate will appear on the November ballot in lieu of the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who died from a heart condition 45 days ago. Graham won the nomination outright on June 9th as he sought his 5th term. Senator Darlene Graham and 5th District Congressman Ralph Norman were the two top vote getters from the August 11th primary out of the field of 10. They are facing off in what is expected to be a very close race here. Now we have Maayan Schechter at Senator Darlene Graham's watch party here in Columbia, and Scott Morgan is in Rock Hill with Congressman Ralph Norman. We also have University of South Carolina political science professor Dr. Kirk Randazzo in studio with us again for his analysis on the races and the numbers as they come in. Kirk, let's start with you briefly. We just saw those numbers. What's that saying to you right now?
Yeah, I think it's kind of surprising to see Senator Graham jump out to that early lead. I think that's very good news for her campaign. And I say this in lieu of the debate last week. She had a notable mistake that Ralph Norman seemed to seize upon, potentially capitalize on. But then she also had President Trump come to the state, deliver that rally on Friday, and maybe that has kind of galvanized some of her supporters to get out. But it's really, as you said, this is going to be a tight race. It's very too close to call at this point, and I expect to see those numbers continue to fluctuate. Yeah, and last time we were on the air, we did see, like 2 weeks ago, obviously. Every 2 weeks I've been seeing you. So we're there for the live coverage of the late Senator's funeral here in Columbia. Then the last 2 weeks ago, we were doing that coverage of the election night, the primary night. And we did see early on around, I think like 8:30-ish, they were calling Darlene as the first place winner of that one. Then Congressman Norman later in that hour. I don't expect us to have those numbers early tonight. As you saw, those numbers are only getting tighter and closer throughout the night. But when we look over the past 2 weeks, Kirk, you just talked about that debate performance last Tuesday. That's where we were last Tuesday night. I was on that debate stage with the senator, with the congressman. And that moment you were talking about there with Darlene and the national security response. And I'm asking you again, when we look at the past 2 weeks, have the candidates done what they needed to do? Maybe besides that little flub there, overall, have they been running the race that you think that they should have been running for these past 2 weeks? I think given how tight this cycle has been, they have done the best they can. They've been out canvassing across the state. The one debate was the time that they got to face off together. But I think they've been doing the meetings. They've had their groups out canvassing folks, knocking on doors. They've had public speeches. The issue is, since we only had 2 weeks, that is such a tight timeline that it is really difficult to get a coordinated message out. Right. And then also maybe do damage control, too, for that debate performance, which we can talk about more and talk about President Donald Trump's appearance this week in Myrtle Beach. But first, we want to go to Maayan Schechter, who was at that Graham watch party here in Columbia. Maayan, how's it going over there? What are you hearing from folks?
Hey, Gavin, this is actually an election night watch party from Senator Graham, unlike what we saw in the primary where she was at a podcast studio and it was her family and just a bunch of reporters stacked on top of each other. We do see dozens of supporters here. We've already seen Congressman William Timmons. We've seen state lawmakers Robbie Robbins and Joe Bustos. We've seen Cody Simpson, the Republican nominee for Department of Agriculture Commissioner. And we are expecting potentially Governor McMaster. We did see a member of his security team here earlier. We're told that everybody is upstairs gathering while election results are still coming in. But so far, it seems like everybody is in a pretty good mood. They've been asking reporters what our thoughts are on tonight, what we think is going to happen, just because everyone believes that this is going to be so close. I should also mention we did also see David Wilkins, of course, the former ambassador and former House Speaker as well. So definitely much more of the vibe of an election night watch party here at a law firm office right across the street from the federal courthouse.
Very good to hear, Mayan. We'll be coming back to you soon to talk to some of those folks that you were just listening off there. A lot of elected officials there with her. And now we're going to go to Scott Morgan up in Rock Hill at Congressman Norman's watch party. Hey, Scott, how's it going up there?
Hey, Gavin. Pretty good. There's a lot of people here, about maybe, I guess, 150 people, 200 people. Ralph Norman himself hasn't shown up, but it's a pretty festive atmosphere. As you can see behind me, there's lots of people. They're having a good time. They're having some food. They're having some drinks. They're having some conversations. And I've run into some guys from Greenville who have come all the way here just to make sure they can show their support for Ralph Norman, because they say he's the constitutional conservative that they want to break the Graham dynasty as they see it. But we're still waiting for Ralph Norman. He should be here in a little bit. As you are saying yourself, the race keeps kind of doing this, and it keeps going back and forth. We're going to find out what's going on.
Stuck right in the middle there, like you're saying, for sure. We'll get back to you guys in a moment. Kirk, we just heard it, Graham Dynasty. Interesting to see here. It's going to be maybe one of the storylines that possibly come out of this if Darlene's able to get this full, well, the nomination and likely that full term, is the power of the Graham name, which is interesting because where Scott is up in the 5th Congressional District, obviously Ralph Norman's district, and the upstate writ large was always a weak spot for Senator Graham. So to see maybe, obviously that's going to be the case up there, but if she can pull this out, I mean, that's kind of a big deal for the Graham name and maybe a dynasty right there.
Yeah, agreed. And you think we have sort of a tale of two different campaigns going on right now. You've got Graham sort of running on that name, on that legacy, a direct connection to her brother, with Norman trying to claim that he has the conservative legislative record, the credentials over several years, but yet Trump endorses Graham, doesn't endorse Norman. So it's very much, will that name and will Trump's endorsement be enough to propel her across the finish line, or will Norman be able to prevail in the end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another thing we're watching tonight, too, the power of that Trump endorsement. We were talking 2 weeks ago. We didn't know if the president was going to come to town because we didn't see him come to town for Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette in that June 9th gubernatorial primary, especially in that runoff, when he instead gave a dual endorsement between her and Attorney General Alan Wilson. Alan Wilson went on to win that by 18 points. Not what we're seeing tonight here for Darlene Graham, who's up by about 7 points right now. Again, 33% of the vote come in. It's still very early. Polls have only been closed for about an hour and change. But right now we're seeing that strong turnout in Horry County for Darlene Graham, where she came in second in that August 11th race. Obviously, that's Congressman Russell Fry's territory, the 7th Congressional District. We're talking about the coast and the PD, the Grand Strand, a must-win area, and that's where we saw Trump rally for her last Friday.
Right, and it's interesting. A lot of the Trump endorsements around the country have lost in similar campaigns, similar races. So I think Trump recognizes he needs this win. And in fact, in the rally in Myrtle Beach, he talked about, please vote as if I'm on the ballot. And in many ways, he is. That endorsement for Darlene Graham came out incredibly early in the cycle, at least early for Donald Trump. He tends to wait until the end, but it came out very early, gave her a tremendous amount of momentum starting off. But then after the debate, a little bit of a stalling happening, and then combined with other endorsements losing their elections, I think Trump recognized, I need to go to South Carolina to try and salvage this. And so far, it looks like that has been successful. Again, it's still too close, too early to call, but I think that has been a notable boost for Graham's campaign.
Yeah, especially when you think about, how he basically cultivated this candidacy for her, launched her in the first place, said that reportedly that he was one that told her to run for the full term in the Oval Office, and then deployed this entire strategy over the past 45 days. Of course, we've been talking about, the morning period and the running, and then also doing some of the work in the Senate too. But it is fascinating because we did see him do a rally. Again, things that we haven't seen him do for other folks necessarily, and also spend a bunch of money from MAGA Inc.
Spent almost $1 million
Yeah.
in support of her, $800,000 in support of her.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see that. We're going to get some numbers here too really quick, if we can bring those up, because it is still very early, but also very tight, with Senator Darlene Graham at 54% and 5th District Congressman Ralph Norman at 46%. So we're talking about an 8-point margin right there. And I think it's also interesting to see, how this is shaping up, Kirk, when we talk about the messaging going into the midterms in November. Obviously, South Carolina, solid red. We'll talk about that later, too. But him having that message on the stage last week in Myrtle Beach saying, vote like I'm on the ballot, that seems like that might be the rallying cry coming from him, coming from the Republican Party going into November, which, of course, is a midterm, which is always pretty bruising, especially the first one.
Yeah, I think that was the boost that Senator Graham needed, in that her message was kind of getting lost after that debate. But
Right.
Trump coming in and saying, vote for her as if I were on the ballot, I think reinforced his support, his notion that, yes, she is going to vote like conservative Republicans want, despite the fact that she doesn't have a record like Ralph Norman. She is one of us. That was the signal that Trump's rally sent. And I very much think that that's exactly what her supporters needed to hear to keep them excited. But more importantly, that's what undecided primary voters still needed to hear, because they hadn't quite gotten that message from her campaign directly.
And again, when we're talking about the debate moment, and we'll go to Mayan in a moment, but when we're talking about that moment where she said, I don't know much about national security, again, showing that she is a true outsider, admitting when she doesn't know what she doesn't know, and the president called that an honest answer there, and that she would defer to the people that do know things like that when it comes to Taiwan. And of course, she's focusing more on those domestic issues versus what her brother Lindsey focused on, which was more foreign policy hawkish stances. So it seems like that's playing out. I know some of the voters I talked to in Horry County were not too upset by that. That didn't really make a difference for them.
Yeah,
and I think that we're seeing that right now.
I think substantively, for a lot of average people, issues with foreign affairs take a distant backseat to what's happening domestically. I mean, a lot of us kind of pay attention to world news, but we really get energized and motivated about what's happening at home. What her answer did, I don't think it upset anybody in a substantive sense, but I think it just demonstrated her inexperience. And that's what gave people pause, and this is what Norman's campaign seized on. Do you want to elect someone that is trying to learn on the job? It's almost as if the Senate were sort of an internship. That was the painting that he was trying to portray. And I think Trump in that rally helped remind people, no, she'll learn some of the foreign policy stuff, but she is really focused on domestic issues that matter to all of us. And I think that was a good message for him to send.
And we did see, speaking about money being spent in this race, we did see a Nikki Haley-line PAC spent about $500,000 running messages on that too, and capitalizing on that for Ralph Norman. But now we're going to jump to Mayan Schechter, who's there at that Graham watch party with the Agriculture Commission Republican nominee Cody Simpson, who is also at that rally in Myrtle Beach. What's he got to say there, Mayan?
Yeah, so we're here with Cody Simpson, of course, as you mentioned, running for Agriculture Commissioner. Tell us, what about Darlene Graham makes her the candidate for you in the Senate race?
Well, Maya and I am so happy to be on our farm. We feel like that Senator Graham is our representative on our farm in Clarendon County. She understands our way of life. Her background growing up in a liquor store and in a bar. Well, I used to run a country store when I was 10 years old, and I pumped the gas. And I just feel that connection with her because she understands our way of life. She understands our trials struggles that we're facing in our communities. But she's from the backcountry, and she's a fighter. She understands our way of life, and we need that person to represent us in Washington, because as the world may be changing, South Carolina, we've got a lot of people moving in here. We need to make sure that we send a strong representative who's going to take care of us on our farms, in our communities, and everybody knows what makes our community strong is our farms, our schools, and our religious centers. And that's why I am so supportive of Senator Graham for 6 more years.
You may be the one candidate in South Carolina who received the fastest endorsement from President Donald Trump. How critical was that endorsement for her in this race?
Oh, I think it was wonderful. You know, he was the one that asked her to run. He said, "Run, Darlene, run," and now we're saying, "Win, Darlene, win." But the president, he understands he needs a fighter in the United States Senate. He has several initiatives, as you know, with the America First agenda, making sure that we pass the SAVE Act. But what we hope to do and what she's agreed to is passing the Farm Bill, because that's important for our everyday lives here in South Carolina. And she's already tackling those major issues like immigration and also other areas of making sure for affordability to get those prices down. In South Carolina, we're 55% higher than the national average. Well, she's talking about that. And those are things that are very important to us, because our families right now are facing them at the kitchen table. The prices are going up, and she's working and willing to help us get more direct to consumer. And I think that's important for our families here, to be able to depend on local farmers. And she understands that because she grew up in her own community.
Again, as a candidate for office, we've heard so much criticism related to Senator Graham's candidacy over her lack of political experience. And again, as a candidate for public office, do you think that that criticism is fair?
I think that she has done a remarkable job in her prior positions. She was on the governor actually appointed her to the Workforce Development Board. She was also the director of the Commission for the Blind. She did a phenomenal job. I actually worked with her when I was over at Governor Masters' office, so I saw her experience firsthand. She advocated for her folks. She advocated for the commission. She literally rebuilt that commission to what it is today. And she fought for folks that, if you think about it, they may not have had a future, but she saw to it that they got a job and that their families were taken care of. And I saw that compassion and I saw that will, because she is a South Carolinian. And I think that, just as mentioned before, is that President Trump, he wasn't a politician before. He had never held elected office. But look at all that he's doing for our country. Look at what she's already done in 20 days of her being in office. I mean, she was already, and people don't pick this up, but I think it's important on our farm, she was able to retain all of Senator Lindsey Graham's positions. What other senator is able to do that? She was able to stay and remain on appropriations, which is be able to deliver for our local communities. I know of fire stations, police officers. I know of these places. I've been there. The infrastructure for these old rural community wastewater plants. Senator Graham was able to deliver that through these communities, and she has pledged to do that, because that is the heartbeat of America, is out in these rural communities, and that's why we want to make sure that she stands up for us, and that's why she's going to win tonight.
And that's Cody Simpson, candidate for Agriculture Commissioner. Cody, thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, thank you. Back to you, Gavin.
Thanks, Mylon. Yeah, like Cody Simpson, definitely the biggest hype person you can find in the Republican Party right now. I saw him in Myrtle Beach, and he got that crowd on their feet. And like Mylon said, that he is the Republican nominee for Commissioner of Agriculture, and he's facing off against Deshaun Blanding, who's a Democrat, as well as Chris Nellums, who's the United Citizens candidate, and Michael Sullins, the Libertarian. Those are all going to be on the ballot in November. His race was already set back in June with that runoff against Danny Ford Jr. So we're going to go to Scott Morgan right now, who's in Rock Hill at Congressman Norman's watch party. Scott, I see you have a supporter there with you.
Yeah. We have. This is Rick Mosner, who is actually down from Greenville. I mentioned a couple guys down from Greenville. This is my new friend, Rick. He's a Navy veteran, came all the way down from Greenville just to support Ralph Norman. Rick, why did you come all the way this way just to show your support in Rock Hill?
Well, it's important this election that we have a senator who is a constitutional conservative and believes in the Constitution. And Ralph is that guy. Ralph was not my guy for governor because I thought Alan Wilson was equally qualified but a better candidate. But the way things turned out with Senator Graham unfortunately passing away, Ralph stepped forward and decided to run. And I looked at him and I said, he's the guy I'm going to support. So Ralph has got probably going to be the most conservative senator in the U.S. Senate when he gets elected. So that's the reason I supported him. I knew him when he was in the legislature in South Carolina, and even though I was from Greenville, I supported him. You know, when he ran for Congress, I was active in the Convention of States project, which we passed back in 2022. Ralph helped us with that and was glad to do it. So that's how I know he's got the same concerns that I do about out-of-control federal government, and we need somebody like him to help rein it back in and represent South Carolina in that regard.
Well, one of the big differences between Ralph Norman and Lindsey Graham was known as a statesman. You know, he had a lot of international experience, and Ralph Norman not necessarily so much. Does that concern you, or are you more concerned with South Carolina issues? Or
no, I feel confident that Ralph can grow into that role. Like anything else, you know, you got to learn the ropes a little bit, but he's far from a rookie, and he is the guy that is the most qualified candidate in this race. And you know, President Trump has endorsed his opponent, and that's fine. But I think he got bad advice. I think that Ralph is far more qualified, and he could be the statesman that Lindsey was. I had issues with Lindsey. We've been trying to run a candidates against him for the last 15 years. Unfortunately, he lined up with John Kerry back in the day on carbon tax, and he voted for Supreme Court justices that are totally inappropriate that we have there today, saying, hey, the president deserves who he's got. And the role of a senator originally, prior to the 17th Amendment, was to represent the sovereign states as an integral part of the federal government. And now we got 535 reps. So I feel Ralph can represent the state better. He's not going there to bring welfare back to the people of South Carolina. He's going there to represent the interests of our states on the national level.
Okay, so one of the things I have to ask you is, Darlene Graham got the Trump endorsement, got it pretty early, and Trump has had a pretty good track record with endorsing candidates. And regardless of how it comes out tonight, why or why not was that a factor for you? Why did that not matter for you to vote for Ralph Norman?
Well, I looked at the candidate and the quality of the candidate, and despite the fact she's a very nice lady, I looked at her and I just didn't, and really it wasn't a turning point for me, but it connected the dots for me, was the debate. The answers that she gave in the debate were totally unacceptable in my regard with respect primarily to national security. The reason for the federal government, and I'm going back to her, you know, original thoughts here, as far as what the framers was to protect the rights of the states. And by not understanding at that point about national security, it was a fatal flaw. And I never would have voted for her in the beginning, but that just drove home that point.
I see. All right. Well, like I said, this is my friend Rick Mosner. He's down from Greenville. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate your time.
Sure.
Gavin,
Yep.
back to you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Great for Rick to do that. I mean, live TV is nothing to shake a stick at, so that was wonderful there. And we're looking at some new numbers here. The latest numbers were about 8:20 right now, 8:23. So an hour and 20 minutes since polls closed. And Senator Darlene Graham is still in the lead there with 53% to Ralph Norman at 47%. The congressman there right now, the AP is saying about 50% of the votes have been counted. We're still waiting to see more come in those key counties that we're watching, like Horry, as well as Greenville and Spartanburg. Those are big ones. But a lot of that vote's coming in. So we'll be watching that, especially in that upstate area versus the Midlands and the coast and the low country, all of our wonderful regions in our state here, Kirk. But right now, I mean, again, looking at those numbers, 52% of the vote counted, with Darlene about 6% lead there. What are you thinking right now? She must be feeling pretty confident. Too early?
I think she's feeling more confident than maybe she was before the polls or the booth closed. Mm-hmm. And certainly, if Norman had jumped out to an early lead, I'm not entirely sure there would have been enough momentum for her to catch up. So the fact that she jumped out to an early lead is still over 50%. With about half of the polls closed or those votes come in, I think that bodes well for her. I still don't think it's conclusive enough for her to breathe easy, especially, as you said, we're still waiting to hear from a lot of counties in the upstate. The upstate is typically the more conservative part of South Carolina, and there's a good chance that many of those votes are going to go for Norman. So it's a question of how long can she hold on, I think. And Norman, I think, is hoping to rapidly close that distance.
And Kirk, as we were talking, things did just kind of jump a little bit, especially up in Greenville where the votes were slowly coming in. About 47% of the vote in Greenville is coming so far, and that's really shrunk the distance between the two of them, with Graham still at 51%, shrinking to 51%, I should say, and Norman now at around 49%. So at 2 points, we're going from 6 to 2, and that's what's going to be happening throughout the night. We don't expect a race call, unfortunately, while we're on the air, so we probably won't have any speeches or anything like that unless they know something we don't know from these candidates. But again, we're waiting for the AP to decide that, and it's about almost an hour and a half since these polls have closed. They're still trickling in. 60% of the votes are in, and Graham is still at 51% to Norman 49%. So tight. It's happening right now as those votes are coming in from the upstate, but we're still waiting on places to really fill out, like the coast and more. So it's going to be a nail biter to the end.
Yeah, I would be surprised if this thing is not a fraction of a percent difference at the end of the day.
A recount, essentially.
We will likely have a recount. I just think it is so close, and the two candidates are tapping into different aspects of the Republican Party, a party that is potentially split sort of down the middle, that some that are thinking about what a post-Donald Trump Republican Party might look like, others that are trying to sort of champion the MAGA label and lean into that as much as possible. And I think this is really a telling point for the Republican Party about what they have in store in the near future.
And Kirk, going back to the rally at Myrtle Beach with the president last Friday, I mean, he did say, no, the Republican Party is 100% MAGA. Like, that is him. He's owning that. Right now, it does not look like that. When we talk about MAGA, we're saying him, essentially.
Right.
And we're seeing this deviation, and that's what you've been seeing play out, too. And I think Politico had a very interesting headline today, too, which said, South Carolina could give Trump a revitalizing win or his most embarrassing loss. And this kind of goes back to the time and energy that he's spent in this race and that money that we saw him invest in it yesterday. So it really is going to be a big one for him if he doesn't pull this out for Graham.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his endorsement of Darlene Graham, he took a virtual unknown individual that just had the last name, the family connection to Lindsey Graham. He propelled her onto the national stage. And if she wins, it will be in no small part because of Trump, his endorsement, the money that his PAC has spent. But if she loses, that also, as Politico said, I read that article, that is going to be an embarrassing defeat for him because he took someone that nobody knew. He could have easily thrown his endorsement to a Russell Fry or to a Ralph Norman, who have voted consistently with him on virtually all issues. Norman maybe, bucked him a couple of times, but that was it. He could have easily thrown his endorsement to either of them, and I think that would have been a slam dunk. But throwing the endorsement to an individual that nobody really knew prior to her brother's death, that's a test now on the Trump name, that brand, and the weight that it still carries.
Yeah, and that Graham name, too. And I think kind of going back to what you were just mentioning with him and Congressman Norman having some tiffs over the years, whereas you get someone like Senator Graham, who, like her brother, is going to support Trump no matter what. Obviously, the late senator really had, his time getting to know Trump and getting to be that person, but he became his golf buddy. He became basically his foreign policy advisor. He was always on the Sunday shows communicating in ways that the White House maybe wished that the president would communicate like, and deciphering that because, Graham was such a great communicator in that way, doing all those things to fight for Trump's agenda. And I think you're seeing that carry over, and maybe he's projecting that onto Darlene because he knows that she will just maybe do what he says. That's what she's always been saying on the debate stage, that I'm going to fight for what he wants to get done over these next 2 years. versus like someone like Congressman Norman, who's in the House Freedom Caucus, that far-right caucus, which has caused some consternation over the years, including during the debate and advancement of the One Big Beautiful Bill last year in committee, getting it down there to the floor for passage. Going back to even 2025, which I think a lot of people forgot about, that speaker's election race, right? When Mike Johnson was up for election, you saw Congressman Norman backing Jim Jordan in that situation. And then you had Congresswoman Nancy Mace on the House floor with her cell phone, with Donald Trump on the phone saying, talk to him. Right. They huddle up, and then you see Norman flip that vote. That's fresh in Trump world. They probably keep a list of those offenses. And of course, Norman wanted to use some leverage there, but sure, you got to understand, while you are a congressman, you are trying to get what you can. I don't think you use leverage against the president when he's trying to get what he wants done at the time. And he's president-elect at that time.
So you had that situation. You also had Ralph Norman endorse Nikki Haley in the 24 presidential primary. And I don't think Trump has forgotten that part either. And so those are the two notable times when Norman has gone against Trump. But virtually every other time, even with the One Big Beautiful Bill, Norman was an initial holdout, but got things shifted a little bit more to where he was comfortable, and then ultimately voted in favor of it. Right. I think he is very surprised that Trump did not throw the endorsement his way. Right. And certainly Russell Fry, again, same kind of thing. Even without the couple of instances of rebuking the president, Fry doesn't get that endorsement either. So you have Graham, her last name, Trump, his name. It's very much of, is that enough to catapult her across the finish line, or is it a demonstrated, proven legislative track record that someone can run on? And those are two fascinating questions to see which one's going to win out in the end.
And I want to go back to that idea in a moment, too. Before we go to Mayan, I want to talk about Russell Fry, Congressman Fry, who did come in third in the original primary here 2 weeks ago, and how his support has shifted. Obviously, he endorsed Graham later, and this, a lot of people like Senator Tim Scott got off the sidelines, too, and endorsed. We saw the governor endorse also during this runoff period. So a lot of change there. And I think for Fry, and like a lot of people, this opportunity does not come along every election cycle. Yes, a lot of people do challenge these incumbents. We saw Senator Graham really always beating back those folks. He never got into a runoff, unlike his sister, which is different. There's 10 people unknowns and well-knowns. So I think for Congressman Fry, I think that you did see a lot of people endorse him, really trying to see maybe that new generation. But then you saw these two really kind of take the cake, and now we're really battling out. And what I say that to say is that this would be a completely different race if it was Senator Graham versus Congressman Fry.
Or it would have been a completely different race if we had had 2 months for this to play out, as opposed to 2 weeks. Right? So typically, when you have someone die in office in a special election, you have a month, multiple months to kind of lead up to those votes. And we just didn't have that here.
We're going to go to Mayan Schechter at Senator Darlene Graham's watch party, where I believe she has Greenville Senator Jason Elliott with her. Hey, Mayan.
Hey, Gavin. Senator Elliott, you served a little bit with former Congressman Ralph Norman in the State House, but why go with Senator Darlene Graham over Congressman Ralph Norman in this race for you?
Congressman Norman is a great guy. Served in the South Carolina House and now in the Congress, been in government for about 20 years. In South Carolina, we have a tradition with Senator Graham, Senator Thurmond, of our senators, U.S. senators, working hard for South Carolina. You know, we are a growing state, but we're still a relatively small, we're always a small state, a relatively poor state compared to the rest of the country. We need someone in Washington fighting for us every day. You know, we've got to bring fiscal restraints, but we got to, if other people in the country are getting federal resources, we can't have someone in Washington with hands tied behind their back, not working for South Carolina. I'm confident that Senator Darlene Graham will pick up the baton from Senator Lindsey Graham and produce for South Carolina. Produce for South Carolina health care, for colleges, universities, for every facet in South Carolina. Whether it's philanthropic, whether it's education, whether it's business and industry, we need a U.S. Senator who fights for us every day. And I'm confident that's what we're going to get if Senator Darlene Graham is elected tonight.
And you're just talking about the late Senator Lindsey Graham. He obviously not only was a conduit between the legislature and the White House, brought millions in federal dollars to South Carolina. I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but just how critical for you is having someone who can still do that in the White House. And you believe, obviously, that Senator Graham is the person to do that.
Yeah. When anybody in South Carolina, whether it was the governor, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, when they picked up the phone and they called Senator Lindsey Graham, he worked for South Carolina and he produced. And it was not like, no, that's not my job. It was his job, and he knew it was his job every day to put our interests first in South Carolina and to be our face in Washington. And that's what we need, and that's what we would sacrifice if we don't have someone there doing that.
When you talk to voters, there's obviously been a lot of national attention about her debate performance, particularly around the question about Taiwan. When you talk to voters, are voters concerned about that response? Is that something that you've heard that it was weighing on their mind when they voted today?
Yeah. And, you know, everybody has a different opinion. Some folks thought, hey, that gave me a little bit of pause. I had somebody tell me, you know, I don't care if she knows the difference between Taiwan and Timmonsville. I know she can learn. And that she's been on this job for 20 days, and she has helped do great things for this country. She's helped the administration, and she's helped South Carolina, and that's what we need. You know, this is a unique process. This is obviously not the way we normally elect senators in South Carolina. So it is a unique process, but I think in the limited time that she's been there, she has shown that she is someone who will work hard and someone who will learn. And I'm confident if she is nominated tonight and going on, and I'm confident the Republican nominee will win the general election. And if it's Senator Darlene Graham, South Carolina is going to be in good hands.
And that's State Senator Jason Elliott. Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Back to you, Gavin.
Mayan, yeah, one of those Graham supporters in a very strong Norman area. Again, we're looking at new numbers here, with Senator Darlene Graham still edging out a lead there over Congressman Ralph Norman, with Graham at 52% and Norman at 48%. And right now that's from the AP, and we're seeing about 68%, 67% of the vote is in, with Graham with a 4-point lead there. Still very early. Polls have been closed for about an hour and a half. But things are trucking along here. We saw a lot of turnout, which we can talk about in a moment. But I want to go back to what Mayan was talking to Senator Elliott about, and that's bringing that money back, the bacon, the pork, the federal money back to the state, Kirk. Lindsey Graham would always joke about doing that and how unpopular that was. It was just basically him and Congressman Clyburn doing that. But, you know, we have multiple major military installations here, one of which was just renamed in his honor, right. Joint Base Charleston. I was down there for that event. So was Senator Graham. So we saw Department of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. We saw Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's also a South Carolinian, and the governor. And the reason that, I mean, that happened in lightning speed when we think about how things happen in the federal government, that renaming to Joint Base Lindsey Graham, or those C-17s with that airlift wing, the U.S. Air Force really being the backbone of the military right there, being able to transport equipment, soldiers, right. Troops around the world. They wanted to honor him with that ability because he did support the military, both, you know, with money coming back to these installations in the state and his 30 years in the Air Force in a variety of capacities. So when we talk about that, that's a main difference between what you're seeing with Norman and what you're seeing with Graham here. And that's something I heard her talk about on the campaign trail just Monday in Aiken, which is home to the Savannah River National Laboratory, too.
Right. Yeah, and it's important to remember that one of Lindsey Graham's strengths, and I think one of the reasons that he continued to get elected, even when he had primary challengers come out, was the constituent service that he provided. That was something that he and his office put a really strong emphasis on. And he learned that from Strom Thurmond, Fritz Hollings before him, that were just brilliant at doing things for the people of South Carolina. Lindsey never lost that focus. And it's not necessarily the glamorous stuff that we see. It's not out in the spotlight. Most of this is in the shadows, behind the scenes. You don't necessarily get to take credit, but it is absolutely essential. And when Tim Scott entered the Senate, I think Lindsey helped position Senator Scott to do some of that. It's going to be Tim Scott's responsibility now to step up a bit more since he is now the senior senator, no matter who wins tonight. But that was an aspect of Lindsey Graham that it doesn't often get talked about. We talk about when he was doing the talk shows or when he was on his trips overseas, when he was championing certain bills and legislation, maybe working in a bipartisan manner on some things, but we kind of forget the constituent side.
Right.
And that is really, really important for the voters. And I think you heard just now the state senator talking about just how important that was. He thinks Darlene Graham is going to provide that. Obviously, supporters for Ralph Norman think he's going to be best positioned. But that really is a question that I think resonates with everyday individuals.
Yeah, and I think that messaging, well, you're totally right about that, is it gets a loss when she mentions the staff that I'm keeping. Right? People don't understand necessarily what that means unless you've really interacted. But I did talk to one of Senator Graham's staffers out in the PD, and they were telling me just, when Lindsey got in office, when he won that 2002 election, 2003, he was told, you have big shoes to fill. Like you're saying with Strom Thurmond with those constituent services. You had Thurmond in there for 47 years.
Right.
You had Hollins in there for 38 years. And then you have Graham come in 2002. Hollins gets out of there a couple years later. And, because Hollins was always the junior senator for all 38 years.
For almost 4 decades, right?
Exactly. Thurmond was in there for 47 years. So, and then here comes Graham, and automatically, like, now he's the senior senator after Hollins got out. But that carried over, and that's something that has helped him, like you said, get reelected and prove that. And that on top of that true campaign machine that we've seen deployed since that time, since he got in the House, since he got in the Senate, that has really been deployed in a way, especially that they have not been deployed in some time, because you had an unknown. You had his sister who is not polished, who is an outsider, and folks want outsiders, but this is what an outsider looks like. And then she gets accused of not talking to the media enough, which, was true. She didn't really come around to that until a little bit later in the cycle. And then you have these gaffes. I mean, this is what happens. So it's always interesting to see when people say they want someone who's been in office a long time, or they want an outsider, and which is worse, which is better.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people tend to forget is that you really can't get things done until you know the institution inside and out. So, a great example outside of South Carolina might be a Robert Byrd from West Virginia, a longtime serving senator from West Virginia that knew the Senate, the rules, the institutional norms, and he was a powerhouse in the Senate. Lindsey Graham learned that over a short period of time. He recognized that importance, and that allowed him to have tremendous influence in the Senate over his decades-long service. That is something that often gets glossed over. We tend to say we want an outsider because we're sick of Washington, D.C. and all those politics. But the outsider doesn't have the connections, doesn't have the influence. And that's something that Lindsey Graham brought to this state. The chairships that he had on judiciary, on finance, on budget. I mean, those things were huge. And yes, Darlene Graham is still on those committees, but we lost that chairship. We lost that influence. And whether it's Graham, whether it's Norman, whether it's anybody, it's going to take a long time to build that up. So now it's really going to fall on Tim Scott to kind of put himself out there more than he's had to in the past. And that's going to be an interesting shift just for the entire state as well.
Yeah, we did see him get on Meet the Press this past weekend talking about that he was at Trump's rally there talking in support of Graham. And, he did eulogize her brother twice at the prayer breakfast and then also the service in here in Columbia. So it is interesting to see that he's got that evolution we're talking about there, too, because, a lot of people are going to be going to that office and vice versa. Well, Graham's office knows how to do a lot of things. People are going to be looking at his office as well to do a lot of things, too. So, and he's over the banking committee. He's also over the NRSC, which is going to be a big deal this, midterm season when Democrats are looking to flip at least 4 seats if they want to get that majority in the Senate. So a lot of responsibilities there, too, and also the Trump influence in those races, too, especially when you look at places like Texas with Ken Paxton and how the money's going to be being spent around there.
I think the other thing to recognize, you had mentioned Graham's office. You know, with either Darlene Graham or Ralph Norman coming in, many of those staff members may decide to seek employment someplace else, right? We typically see that kind of turnover with a new senator. But even with existing senators, turnover of staff is a relatively regular phenomenon. Lindsey Graham was able to keep his staff for a long time, which I think bodes well or speaks to his legacy, how he conducted himself. And so not only is the state losing the influence of Lindsey Graham, but we're losing potentially the expertise of those staffers once November comes and goes, and it'll be curious to see who comes in to replace them.
Gotcha. And we're going to go and get a full page ad here of graphics for our viewers watching, because we see some new numbers, some movement here with Senator Graham at 53%. And Congressman Ralph Norman there at 47%. We're talking about a 6-point margin. So that has increased since it got a little bit tighter. About 75% of the votes have been counted. We're seeing a lot of support, of course, as we expected it to be with Norman in the upstate, that Greenville area, the Spartanburg area, his home county of York, of course, in that 5th congressional district that he's represented since 2017. Then when you move more into the Midlands of the state, including Lexington County, we're seeing that support for Graham. She's up about 59% to Norman and 40% in Lexington County, with about 75% of the votes being counted there, Kirk. So, and also in Richland County here, obviously a more Democratic county when it comes to overall elections, but we're just looking at the Republicans voting right now because the Democrats can't vote in this special primary unless they jump over and they don't tell anyone. They're trying to close those primaries. And I wonder, who knows if we can decipher that later. But interesting to look at Lexington County with, again, 75% of the vote being counted there, and she's at 60%. This was going to be one of those swing counties. Everyone was talking about the coast versus the upstate. And then the poor Midlands where we are, that's where the tug of war is happening.
And I think what's fascinating about Lexington County is you had their county GOP endorsed Ralph Norman, despite the fact that that's Darlene Graham's home county. So I think there was a potential expectation, certainly a question, of whether the county GOP's endorsement of Norman would be enough to swing things his way. The fact that she's still holding at 60%, I think it makes her feel very, very comfortable about her chances, knowing that she's probably not going to do well in the upstate, and that's what we're seeing currently. But Lexington, Richland County, down towards Charleston, Horry County, those are places that I think she absolutely needs to hold on to.
And Kirk, we have still not heard from the Associated Press yet, but we are seeing reporting that Senator Graham is the winner. Again, we're not doing that. That's Decision Desk reporting that, some other outlets reporting that. We may be hearing from her soon. This is kind of not what we expected. We thought it to be a little bit closer. We're talking about these margins growing here, but Decision Desk is projecting Darlene Graham winning South Carolina just moments ago on Twitter there, so I'm sure the Twitter spheres are Twitter about this, but we're still waiting for the AP. It's still about 75% reporting here that we're seeing. So if that does hold, if we do see the AP call this, right now I'm seeing about a 6% margin, 6-point margin here. That would be a pretty big moment there for her.
I think that is absolutely huge. Again, I figured this was going to come down to a fraction of a percent.
Yeah, I thought we'd be up till midnight watching this thing.
And possibly even waiting for a recount tomorrow or the next couple of days. The fact that she still has a 6% margin and that some outlets are calling it for her, I think is huge. It also bodes well for Donald Trump. We were talking about the potential strength of his endorsement, whether his brand still matters. I think this is, if this holds and she is the winner, that is absolutely a feather in his cap. And I think also speaks to the importance of him coming to Myrtle Beach on Friday to campaign for her. This would be a monumental election.
It's really something to see. Again, we haven't got that from the Associated Press yet. We are seeing some outlets reporting this, that Senator Graham is going to get the nomination tonight. But we'll probably maybe jump to Maayan Schechter, who's at that watch party. I'm sure the vibes and we'll get there eventually, but just kind of throwing that out there for Mayan, that we should come to her and see what the vibe is like out there at the watch party, and hopefully maybe even stay on the air past 9 o'clock in case we do expect to hear from Senator Graham about this, because it would be a monumental moment to see that. Again, we're still seeing numbers come in. The AP has about 76% of the votes counted. They have not called the race yet, but we are seeing, again, that turnout, that major turnout that she needed in Horry County. We're seeing that turnout here in the Midlands, in Lexington County, and of course, Norman still getting that strong support in the upstate. But when the rest of the state is going Graham, there's only so much the upstate can do for you.
Yeah, and I think the fact that she jumped out to an early lead, that was a really good signal, because she wasn't having to try and play catch up. She had that lead, and it was just a question, could she hang on to it? But that, is some momentum that absolutely makes her supporters feel good, keeps them excited and energized. And so we'll see if she holds on to it throughout the whole night.
And Mayan, we wanted to jump to you. I want to see what the vibe's like out there at Darlene Graham's watch party here in Columbia right now.
Yeah, certainly the excitement has amped up here. We thought that Senator Darlene Graham was walking in a few seconds ago, but it was just outbursts of applause, chants of Darlene Graham. We've seen folks hugging each other, saying great job. So clearly, the feeling is that the Graham campaign has won this one. We're seeing staff and other supporters start to congregate around the stage right behind me. Also, it sounds like perhaps we may be getting ready for the senator to come out, but we'll see. We know that it took a while back during the primary itself, but definitely a much more upbeat room than even around 20 minutes ago. It seems like the folks here really feel like she's got ahead and crossed the finish line on this one.
Thank you, Mayan. Thanks for that update. We'll go right back to you when we know for sure, or if she walks out and go ahead and admits that, because they do have, of course we're waiting for the AP, but they have their staff, they're dispatched around the state to get those results at those precincts as they happen. But Kirk, when we start looking ahead to November toward the general election with Annie Andrews, the pediatrician who's the Democratic nominee there's also a Libertarian and Constitution Party candidate on the ballot too. But Dr. Andrews is going to be the big target here between the both of them. I'm just wondering the messaging that starts after this, the momentum that we see after this, and maybe how Dr. Andrews starts pivoting too. I did see her over the weekend at the Spratt Issues Conference that the Democrats held in Florence. So there's a lot of messaging going on, and then it becomes the real deal. She was talking about also, she was up in Spartanburg, a Republican stronghold. You don't see the Democrats going there. I know that that's part of their new strategy to really go to those places because there are still Democrats there, and talking about those issues and trying to engage those voters in those areas.
Yeah, I think Dr. Andrews was hoping to see a matchup with Darlene Graham. That I think some of the early polling viewed that one-to-one a bit more in Dr. Andrews' favor. I still think it's very much an uphill battle for her. I think it's difficult for any Democrat to win a statewide office in South Carolina. We've only seen it a handful of times recently. But I think going up against Ralph Norman might have been even more of a challenge for her, because he could just lean on his record that Dr. Andrews doesn't really have. And now with Darlene Graham potentially there, neither one has an extensive legislative record to fall back on. So it really becomes a battle of ideas. And that's not something we've really seen a lot in campaigns. Typically it's mudslinging, it's partisan politics. But now if we have to campaign on actual ideas, on substantive issues, that's going to be a really interesting change, and it'll be curious to see how each individual gets their message across. Senator Graham still has to kind of introduce herself, and Dr. Andrews is going to have to continue to introduce herself. But I think they're going to start pivoting more to those substantive discussions.
Right, and you're talking about introducing themselves, and for Graham, it's more of a challenge too. I mean, that's, I'm assuming, what we're going to start seeing maybe behind the scenes with her and her staff as they really gear up for the general election, is really trying to get her read up so they don't have those moments again like we saw on the debate stage last Tuesday when it comes to international, foreign national security, when it comes to our foreign allies and adversaries at the same time. So I'm wondering if that's going to be an interesting aspect of how we see her shift over the coming days and weeks But you were also talking about the intensity of campaigning in South Carolina, too, always known as a blood sport here. I feel like the past 2 weeks, even this maybe his entire campaign, obviously due to the circumstances of it, but has not been as divisive. Obviously, if you get on Twitter, it's a whole different world.
Sure.
That I'm not on Twitter for that reason, because I don't really understand the benefit of it sometimes, besides the breaking news moments like this. But I feel like we haven't seen as much of that. I mean, we did see the attack ads from Norman and Align PACs going after her for her flub on the debate stage, but he never seemed to really drill down as hard as he could have when it came to the inexperience, when it came to these errors and these sidesteps. I mean, or pressing her more on the debate stage. It was more talking about himself, which is what you want to do, of course, but really not exploiting that big weakness in some people's opinions.
Yeah, and he made it a point to say, look, I'm really running against the Democrats. I'm not running against another Republican. And maybe that was a missed opportunity. I mean, in hindsight, since it looks like he's not going to win, that was likely a missed opportunity. But I think for the Andrews-Graham matchup, I mean, Andrews was going to run against Lindsey Graham on domestic issues. She was going to lean into her medical experience, her career as a pediatrician, and Darlene Graham, by acknowledging national security is not really my thing, she has positioned herself as being interested in those domestic policy issues. So now I think we're going to see a campaign based on what's happening at home, not a whole lot dealing with foreign affairs, and it's going to be really curious to see how those messages get crafted.
Right, I want to circle back to that in a moment when we talk about the domestic issues, especially affordability, Democrat versus Republican, the general. That's going to be interesting for everybody looking at the midterms, but we're going to go to Scott Morgan about Congressman Ralph Norman's watch party in Rock Hill. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Gavin. Well, it's still pretty festive here. Everybody's still in a fairly good mood, but the reality of the situation seems to be landing on everybody. It doesn't look like to most people here that Congressman Norman's actually going to pull this out, but they feel pretty good about it. They stand by their choices. I was talking to some people, and they said, well, whatever Ralph does in the future, he is going to be successful because he always has been. Something he said when he lost his bid for governor a couple months ago was that he wanted to found a conservative think tank here in Rock Hill, and everybody seems to be in a fairly positive mood about that. The mood here does seem to be a little less than it was before, but it's still doing pretty good. They're still here for their guy, who actually hasn't still shown up yet. We're still waiting to hear from Ralph Norman, and when we hear from him, you will be the first to know, I promise.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to let our audience know that we are planning to go into extra innings tonight. We were going to go off the air at 9 o'clock, but we're going to stick around because we have been hearing, we've already seen Decision Desk HQ projecting Darlene Graham winning the nomination tonight. We have not heard from the Associated Press yet, but outlets like Bloomberg and The Hill have taken that as it is, as the nomination right now. And like you heard from folks, there's a lot of celebration going on with the Graham campaign, a little, I don't want to say dourness or sadness. I can't find the word I'm looking for. Maybe just melancholy is the word happening up there in Rock Hill. But we'll find out more as we wait for the Associated Press to really be the definitive shot caller on this one, because only 81% of the votes are in, and we're talking about a 6-point margin there. It's been holding pretty strong with Senator Darlene Graham at 53% and Congressman Ralph Norman at 6%. So that's with about 86% of the votes being counted. Again, we're talking about where these battles have been playing out in these counties in the Republican stronghold of Horry County, which is the home turf of 7th Congressional District Congressman Russell Fry, who was in this race up until 2 weeks ago when he came in third, and then threw his support behind Darlene Graham. And that support seems to be helping her out major when it comes here, as well as the support of President Donald Trump, who held a major rally there in Myrtle Beach last Friday. All these factors coming into play now. What we thought was going to be a super close race, but as you can see, 6 points right now, Kirk. 86% of the votes counted. A different vibe than maybe a lot of people were feeling. I mean, I was talking to staffers. You were talking to politicos. Anyone you're looking at polling, everyone had this within the margin of error. Right now, it's still early, but it's 6 points right here. So a little bit different, a little bit unexpected. Maybe they lowered expectations, and then, again, that Trump rally really helped blow it out.
I mean, that could very well be, and I think it's going to take a bit of time to figure out sort of what, if any, definitive factor went into this. But the bottom line is, at this point in the race, to be up by 6 points is a comfortable lead. Right. And if I was a supporter of Darlene Graham, I would be ecstatic right now. And for Ralph Norman, I mean, like you said, a little bit of melancholy. I mean, this is kind of the second time around. You know, they had the gubernatorial race, and you know, we just heard that he's thinking about maybe moving in a different direction, starting a think tank. Mm-hmm. But I think for his supporters, I think the writing is on the wall.
Kirk, when we talk about that, when we look at the governor's race with Attorney General Alan Wilson getting that nomination, and we look at this and where the votes are going for Senator Graham, and we look at the camps at their end versus maybe the Mark Lynch's, the Congressman Normans of the world, it seems that I think a lot of people want that more extreme, that further right candidate. They talk about that a lot, and then you see this play out. So what does that say maybe about the Republican electorate here in South Carolina, that they still want someone to kind of walk that line that we saw Lindsey Graham do for so long up in Congress and in the Senate?
So I think it's important to recognize that when it comes to a primary election, mm-hmm. you have such a small segment of the eligible voting population show up. I mean, we're talking, you know, maybe double digits in the teens. If maybe we get to 20%, we consider that to be really good turnout for a primary. In South Carolina, because it is such a Republican-dominated state, that means those 20%, 10 to 20% that turn out in the primary are likely the ones that have just picked your next candidate for whatever statewide office. You know, if South Carolina was more of a purple state, right. what we would see is primary candidates on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, run to their extremes for the primary, and then once they secure the nomination, pivot and have to run back to the middle to pick up the moderate voters, the independents that didn't turn out in the primary election. We don't quite have a similar phenomenon in South Carolina. So it's really a small minority of the party that gets to choose that candidate, and 70 to 80% of the state just really isn't involved in that process. They don't show up, they don't turn out to vote in those primaries, and they could have easily swayed things in any number of directions, especially when we had 10 candidates in the field. So I think the lesson is, it's the primary in South Carolina that matters. And as you said, that plays well to individuals who move out to the more extreme parts of their party.
We'll elaborate on that more, too, but we have breaking news right now with the Associated Press declaring Senator Darlene Graham as a Republican nominee for the Senate here at 9:01. Again, the numbers, we have 89% of the votes being counted, but the Associated Press making that call at 9:01 p.m. for Senator Darlene Graham, a decisive victory for her, who 45 days ago, South Carolinians were ready to see Senator Lindsey Graham go to bat for his 5th term in the Senate. And then, of course, he passed away, and we saw the governor appoint Senator Graham to fulfill the remainder of his term. And then she turned around after being asked by President Donald Trump to run for the full term. And here we are. She's now the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate, continuing her brother's legacy, moving forward to the general election, facing off against Democrat Dr. Annie Andrews. Kirk, this is a huge moment for her.
Kudos to her for pulling this off, because you got to think about what she's experienced in the last month and a half. Her brother passes away, someone who was basically her surrogate father, and she's in mourning for that, dealing with all of the family issues that come, the grief that comes with that. She then gets appointed to fulfill the rest of his term. So now she's up in Washington, D.C., meeting with other senators, mm-hmm. sitting in on committees, getting briefed on all of the issues, taking those votes, and then she's in a campaign. So you have 3 incredibly high-pressure environments that she's trying to navigate simultaneously. And the fact that she was able to pull it off tonight, I think, is tremendous.
Kirk, to that end, when you're talking about all the demands that were under her for the past 45 days, their upbringing alone was very interesting and difficult as well. That story really resonated, especially when you're talking about affordability issues and having to live paycheck to paycheck, like the senator talked about, a complete difference to Congressman Ralph Norman, who as well often has that background as well. But when you see how she handled herself for the past 45 days, yes, there's been concerns over her experience and her outsider status. But I think maybe what's not being said enough is that she didn't really crack under this pressure. Yes, there was a moment on the debate stage, but she didn't fall apart. She stumbled, she got back up. And that's been kind of the name of the entire Graham family ever since their parents passed away when Senator Graham was in his 20s and she was in her teens. Continuing on, they are clearly survivors like Senator Graham was, making it through those primary elections without getting dragged into runoffs. And now here is his sister making it through a runoff and moving forward into the general election in a very red state where she's expected to win as well, like her brother did, carrying that baton, showing the strength of that Graham name. It's remarkable to see, as well as, of course, the support of President Donald Trump, who made all of this happen.
Yeah, I think her grit, her resilience, the perseverance over the last several weeks in the face of all these different pressures just compounding on themselves, I think that speaks volumes to the type of person that Darlene Graham is. Certainly, she's got to learn the ropes about being the senator, and I have no doubt that she'll continue to gain that experience, to learn things that she needs to. But now she's got the additional challenge of doing the run for the general election in November. And she's going to have to lean into the issues that she believes are important, where she can craft the best narrative to run against Dr. Andrews.
And when you have a campaign staff like the Graham machine, you have that district staff, you have that Washington staff for the office, but when you talk about that campaign, they've been engaged. They've been with the late senator for decades as well, and now they're with her, and that's also been a huge part of this as well. Of course, the Trump endorsement, the character of Darlene herself, the senator, and then you look at that campaign machine that's been well-oiled for years. Yes, they've faced primary challengers. They spent a lot of money this past year fending off those challengers, but they never really had to work too hard on the late senator's messaging. He had that down pat, being such a good communicator. Now they're pivoting to really honing in, I would assume, on Senator Darlene's messaging, her background, getting bred up, because again, the character seems to be already there, as we've seen over the past 45 days. Now it's the fine-tuning. Now it's really learning the issues further. But again, when you're talking about affordability, facing off against the Democrats, that is the issue in November, and that'll be fascinating to watch as she goes up against Democrat Dr. Andy Andrews.
Well, and it'll be very curious, given how closely Darlene Graham has tied her political fortune to Donald Trump, with the president's approval numbers seemingly getting lower and lower with every poll. She's not, since she doesn't have a record to run on herself, she's essentially running on his record. And then it becomes a question of whether her election becomes more of a referendum on him and sort of the Republican Party more broadly speaking, or if she can make this about herself. Certainly, Andy Andrews is going to try and tie Graham and Trump and the Republican majorities in Congress, tie them all together to say this is not good for average people, and Graham's going to have to figure out a way to counter message against that.
Right, so we were going to hopefully try and see if we could get waited out till we saw Senator Darlene Graham give maybe an acceptance speech on behalf of, after she got that nomination for the Republican U.S. Senate seat here, carrying on her brother's legacy. The Associated Press called that at 9:01 p.m. So we're about 2 hours after polls closed, essentially, here in South Carolina. And I just want to go ahead and maybe talk about some things that we've seen come out since then. We heard from SCGOP Chairman Drew McKissick, who sent out a statement saying on behalf of the South Carolina Republican Party, he wants to congratulate Senator Darlene Graham on her hard-fought victory. Also saying that throughout this process, it's been a historic moment for South Carolina and Republican primary voters that rose to this challenge, saying now that Republicans need to come together, unite, and work to expose the Democrats' candidate for the radical liberal that she truly is. And that was SCGOP Chairman Drew McKissick. They're already shaping up that message going into November now that we are in general election mode. Starting as of right now, starting as of 9:01. You heard there from Drew McKissick of the SCGOP there. Not too far from what I've been hearing on the campaign trail. We heard from President Donald Trump. We're hearing about how every Democrat's a socialist, every Democrat is a communist. There's not as much explanation behind that, but they're pointing to other states where there's been a movement with the DSA and then other folks, and trying to tie everyone together at the same time. And I'm wondering, how Democrats are going to combat that unified message from Republicans and what they're going to need to do to overcome that, Kirk.
Yeah, just like Annie Andrews is going to tie Darlene Graham to Donald Trump, Graham and the Republican Party are going to try and tie Annie Andrews to folks like Mayor Mandami in New York, or Senate candidate El Sayed in Michigan, the rise of the Democratic Socialists, of Bernie Sanders, and an AOC, basically to reinforce the image that all Democrats are woke, socialist, communist, pick whatever word you like best. But Republicans are going to try and tie Annie Andrews into that national platform. And so we very much have a referendum, potentially have a referendum, not just on the candidates themselves, but on the parties that they represent. And again, given how red South Carolina is, the challenge is really more to Annie Andrews. Can she pivot in such a way that gives her an edge and resonates with maybe some of the independents, the more moderate voters, both Democrats and Republicans, to try and get them to turn out and vote in November.
Right, and it's going to be an uphill challenge, of course, with the governor's race at the top of the ticket, and of course being a solid Republican state. Before we jump out, I do want to quote a statement from Dr. Andrews, who is the Democratic U.S. Senate nominee, since we just heard from Drew McKissick, the SCGOP chairman. And Dr. Andrews said the following statement: that tonight Republicans nominated a candidate who was appointed to the seat because of her last name and elevated by Donald Trump's endorsement and political machine. But no appointment, endorsement, or family connection entitles anyone to 6 years in the United States Senate. This seat belongs to the people of South Carolina. Now Senator Graham must answer to them. I am renewing my challenge tonight. Join me for at least 3 televised debates across South Carolina and explain how you will lower costs, protect health care, and keep our rural hospitals open. I'll be there, will she? And that was Dr. Annie Andrews in a statement. She's the Democratic U.S. Senate nominee right there. SCETV is planning on having a debate right here, hopefully. So hopefully we get everyone on board for that, too. We love hearing from the candidates, especially as we make these decisions going forward in November. But, Kirk, before we jump, your reaction to that statement in contrast to what we heard from Drew.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very, very curious whether Graham answers that challenge. I think Annie Andrews, especially after the debate last week, she senses an opportunity to potentially pin Darlene Graham down on a couple of issues, maybe trip her up a little bit in some of her answers. Darlene Graham, on the other hand, she's been relatively protective of her time, where she appears, with whom she appears. And so she might be less inclined to do 3 debates. Maybe if we can get 2, we might consider ourselves lucky. But I think Graham very much wants to control that message. And on the debate stage, you don't necessarily have as much control. So that'll be very curious to see how we move forward, the extent to which the 2 candidates face off in person in the same room, as opposed to just crafting messages that fly around the media sphere and the internet and Twitter and all of that.
Exactly. We are in general election mode now. And just recapping before we leave here, Senator Darlene Graham she did win the GOP nomination for the U.S. Senate at 9:01 p.m. according to the Associated Press. That's about 2 hours, about just exactly 2 hours after polls closed here in South Carolina, defeating 5th District Congressman Ralph Norman in this runoff election. It has been a very busy, very fascinating 45 days in South Carolina following the passing of her brother, the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who is running for his 5th term now. And of course, his sister, Darlene Graham, Senator Darlene Graham, is the nominee heading into November, who will face off against Democrat Dr. Annie Andrews on the ballot. We'll be watching, we'll be covering this and so much more, which you can follow along at youtube.com/SCETV SCETV News. That's where we'll have all of our recaps, all of our campaign trail coverage, and more, including this runoff race coverage. And we'll have more for you on This Week in South Carolina at 7:30 p.m. on Friday. Thank you, Kirk Randazzo. You've been with us through a lot of this over the past 45 days. Our reporters in the field, and of course, our crews here in Columbia and around the state. From all of us here at South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio, I'm Gavin Jackson. Thanks for tuning in and good night, and we will join programming right now in progress.